Reach for the speed, reach for the whistle, go where the rail may run. Reach for the words, reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun. To a shining time station, where dreams can come true, waiting there for you.
All aboard the Nostalgia Express. Choo-choo, y'all. It's time for a very loaded episode of For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast. Will Young here with Lucas Mancini. And, I feel... I don't know. I feel a lot of different ways about our episode today. And I'm really interested...
One might say, Will, you feel some type of way about it.
Yes, I definitely do feel several types of ways about it, and I want to be sure. I guess I was kind of... We were talking about this a little bit this morning. I was asking you, like, hey, is there something that we haven't done yet? Like a show that we haven't talked about in relation to PBS Kids that hit for you in the way that this hit for me when I was a kid? And you were pretty sure we've already kind of covered that base.
Yeah, like Zoom, Between the Lions, of course Arthur, I don't know if you've heard of it. Even old episodes, and we might need to return to this, though I'm not really looking forward to it after our episode of our April Fool's episode about it, but Cyber Chase was a big one for me back in the day. But we've really actually kind of, and Wishbone I was nostalgic for, but we've kind of already hit all the big ones that were important to me. So nothing quite as important as what we're about to talk about today to you.
That's what I feel like I want to start with. Maybe a couple of provisos before we get into this episode. You know, normally we have a kind of a structure to these episodes, and this is where we normally talk about what.
We getting loose, Will? Are we doing some audio jazz here?
Not necessarily, but I want to give people an idea of what they're in for, because I was very excited 2 weeks ago when I said we're going to do Thomas and Friends, and then I was informed on the ECL Discord, and further research proved our patrons correct, that it was not just Thomas and Friends that was on PBS, but a show called Shining Time Station, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I feel almost flustered when I'm talking about it, because in a very real sense, Shining Time Station was my childhood. And
wow.
I really don't say that lightly, because the other show that was my childhood, we've been doing a podcast about it for 4 years. So there's a lot of, when I was going through watching the episode for today, when I was doing research on the various aspects of the history portion of this podcast, I almost had to hold back a bit, because I was approaching it from the point where I was like, I don't want to put absolutely everything in here, because there is so much about Thomas the Tank Engine, because holy crap, It's been around for a long time.
I feel like we have to kind of couch this in that, you know, if it was going to be a complete Thomas ep, there's sort of a Ken Burns documentary amount of information to go through.
Right,
so
yes.
I think it's a little bit, because it's got this PBS context. You know, of course we need to know what Thomas is, but it's a little bit more Shining Time Station centric.
That's exactly right. And also
STS as they call it.
Selfishly, I wanted to keep the good stuff, like the real good stuff. I was like, you know, I could probably do a podcast about this. And not to say that I am immediately, but it's an idea that I'm letting germinate in my head. I'm kind of putting it under the heating lamp and seeing if it'll hatch.
Yeah.
I know I said that the research for this episode was going to be quite detailed. It was going to take me a long time, and it did. It took me a bit longer than research normally does, but it is by no means exhaustive. So this is not your as I feel we like to do for all of these episodes. This is not an exhaustive resource. We often grab from a lot of different historical resources, from YouTube videos, from interviews, from all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more that can be said about the story of Thomas the Tank Engine and even Shining Time Station to a degree. So, but I just want...
Listen, don't tempt him, ladies and gentlemen. This is a real threat that Will is holding over your head. At any moment, with enough inclination, more Thomas podcast material could be spoken into existence. But for now, we're safe. No, I'm just joking.
That is indeed the other part of it, is that I want to keep this. We've been doing pretty well. I think For the Kids is normally, similar in length to Elwood City Limits, maybe a little bit shorter. So I wanted to keep that in mind, because I could legitimately talk about this all day. Like, I still have such an affinity for Thomas the Tank Engine, and that will probably come across as we talk about it. But Lucas, what we will get into is when Shining Time Station was on the air. This was on the air before you were born. So I want to know, have you ever seen this show before?
I've never seen this show in my life.
But you've surely seen a Thomas something.
Oh yeah, no. I used to love Thomas when I was a kid. I don't know what it was. It was called Thomas the Tank Engine, and it had British people for sure. Mm-hmm. And I remember, did you ever see the Thomas movie?
Yes.
I was big into the Thomas movie when I was a kid.
Lucas, did I see the Thomas movie?
Oh, of course. I gotta not forget who I'm talking to. But, I had never... To me, George Carlin was, legendary comedian. Mm-hmm. He's, of course, the guy from the future, from the Bill and Ted series.
Rufus, yeah.
But I had no idea that he had hosted this kid show as a tiny little person.
And that's the exact opposite for me. Before I knew that George Carlin was a comedian, I knew him as Mr. Conductor. And we will get into that when we get into Shining Time Station itself. So very interesting. You did see some Thomas stuff, but Shining Time Station was a little bit before your time. And I think it aired, into the mid and late 90s. So there would have been a chance you would have seen it. But yes, I, in fact, did see Thomas and the Magic Railroad in theaters. I had it on VHS. I had the tape soundtrack. And what Thomas stuff didn't I have? Thomas Cheats, Thomas Toys. I had a Thomas bookshelf. I had a Thomas nightlight. That was my thing as a kid, as a very young child. So, of course, Shining Time Station itself is kind of a vessel for the character known as Thomas the Tank Engine, which is still enduring today, and you've probably heard of to some degree. So the history section of the podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of Thomas, and then we'll get into Shining Time Station, which was kind of the way that North American kids in Canada and the U.S. would have primarily seen Thomas around this time.
Thomas Gaiden.
Kinda, yeah. Actually, when you think about it, or like, I'm trying to think. Was there ever like an anime or an animated show where it's just like there was one segment that was an anime and
I think the closest comparison is basically Power Rangers, right? It's actually very, very similar to what Power Rangers was to a Western audience, which is all these clips and footage from these Japanese Sentai shows with all this like American stuff filmed around it. That's kind of exactly what they did with Power Rangers, or rather with Shining Time Station. Is we overdubbed all that British stuff because it would be confusing for those young American minds, and then kind of couched it with new material.
And funny enough, another childhood obsession of mine was Power Rangers. If I had to rank them, I would say number 1 is Thomas, number 2 is Power Rangers, and number 3 was Arthur. It was very, very serious. So Thomas the Tank Engine, of course, is the blue tank engine who is at the center of it all, who is the poster child of the franchise. And he began as a character in a series of British children's books called the Railway Series, written by the Reverend Wilbert Awdry, and then later his son Christopher. So the Reverend W. Awdry, who you will always see at the beginning of I would see him at the beginning of the Thomas VHS tapes that I had, and trust me, I had all of them up until like the mid 2000s. So the Reverend was fascinated with trains from childhood, as many of us are, and felt that all of the trains he would see and hear had distinctive personalities. And he kind of kept that idea in his head until he began to have children. And when his son was very young, in either 1942 or 1943, the Reverend invented the first characters in order to amuse his son while he was sick. Another example of a beloved children's franchise coming from just parents thinking of an idea to give to their children. Lucas, were you much of a train kid?
You know, funny enough, I actually really did. When I was a little kid, I was in love with heavy machinery of all kinds. I used to watch Mighty Machines on VHS all the time, and one of those things was, of course, trains. My mom had this picture book. I forget what it's about, but it's literally just like describing a train. It's like, this train had this type of car, and then this type of car, and this type of car, and a red caboose. And that's like the whole picture book, and I would get her to read it to me over and over and over again. And of course, hence my affinity for the Thomas the Tank Engine movie. I was way into trains as a young lad, as a wee lad.
And like I say, I think that is a common childhood obsession. I've seen it a lot in like young boys, and I'm sure that there are young girls out there who feel the same way. But it's very, yeah, you're right.
Young non-binary people, trains. Everybody loves trains.
Very true.
Everybody hop on the train.
So, I mean, yeah, it's. I think it is the heavy machinery aspect of it. Even today, I'm just like, trains are cool. So, like, I guess it's just the little spark of imagination from childhood, at least it is for me. So Thomas, the character himself, was specifically created because the Reverend Audrey built models of the characters for his son, so he would literally make them out of wood during the 1940s. But because there was a material shortage during wartime, he had to create a stumpier train to represent the character of Thomas, so he became a tank engine. It's funny that Thomas has been around for so long in one way or another that he interacted with World War II. Then, much later, after the book series had already begun and had been existing for many decades, a woman named Britt Allcroft met the Reverend Audrey in 1979 while she was making a documentary about steam trains and had an idea to take the railway series and make it into a television show. So she founded Britt Allcroft Railway Productions with her husband at the time, Angus Wright, and collaborated with series director David Mitton. He would be a big-time director of Thomas and Friends, to create the first 2 episodes of the show that would be Thomas and Friends. It took them several years to get the funding to do so and to produce the episodes. And I mean, you can imagine, Lucas. You think back to the kind of the early and mid 1980s. You know, we talked before in the Theodore Tugboat episode about like the logistics and the mechanics that go into making those types of episodes. This is, I don't know if it would be more difficult. It's hard to say, but it is a challenging undertaking to have the trains look the way they look and operate in the way they do, and then film them in the same way. You know what I mean?
Oh, I understand. There's nothing that quite looks like Thomas the Tank Engine. And I think I keep saying Tank Engine. That's me misspeaking. But we talked about this in the Theodore the Tugboat episode. All those models, there's a timelessness to it. And there's a reason behind that, is that, these original shows, especially at the time when there was nothing else that looked like this, there's a level of craftsmanship required and art direction and all this stuff. And I think there is, like I said, with Thomas, with Theodore the Tugboat, all these T names. I'm getting them all confused, Will. It's got this timelessness to it that things like certain types of animation or certain types of children's shows just don't have this lasting timeless. And I attribute that to its kind of style of making these models.
Yes, I completely agree, and we'll talk about kind of the feeling of watching them when we get into the episode a bit later. I did want to note here a funny note that I found is that the BBC had previously tried to make a production of Thomas the Tank Engine in the 1950s with live-action model trains, and apparently they had a test pilot and it did not go well at all. One of the trains derailed live on the air and they had to get a human hand to fix it. So this was already not I wouldn't say cursed, but it was not an easy undertaking to kind of go along what we were talking about. One of the things that I really wanted to look up was how the trains worked, because when I was a kid, I thought they were real. It's filmed in such a way that you're kind of at eye level with the trains, so they look big enough that they almost look real, even though in reality, they're quite small. And much like with Theodore Tugboat, when we talked about it in that episode, they are radio-controlled models on a railway layout. They have moving eye and eyelid mechanisms, as you can tell when they're always looking around. Their faces are made of resin, and there are also smoke generators in their bodies. So I don't know if you notice kind of all of the the smoke that they were either puffing out of their domes or coming out from underneath them.
No, I didn't even notice the smoke. This is how kind of, engaging, my sense of disbelief has gone. I'm just like, these are trains I'm looking at here.
I think you can see it in some other episodes where there is such a heavier emphasis on steam, and it adds to the realism of it. Of just like, as a kid, I was just like, well, how could these not be just real trains with faces somehow? And of course, today the Thomas productions are primarily CGI. To get on my soapbox here, I think they look terrible. It's kind of a, I can be diplomatic with the Arthur Flash animation. I think it has its place. Yes.
Where this is your version of the Arthur Flash animation, essentially, because for me, that's the Flash animation's a bridge too far. Right. And this is kind of, for you, this is your hill to die on with the reboot CGI looking Thomas the Tank Engine.
I don't like it at all, because now it's like, it's funny, but when you cross the bridge and you have their faces be able to talk and make expressions, like there's just so much, it feels like there's less imagination and heart to it. And of course now you realize it's not really there. So I don't know. The appeal's taken away from me, but I'm a Thomas old head. So, I have to kind of represent in that way. Okay, so Thomas and Friends was the British presentation, and in North America, it was part of a show called Shining Time Station, and we kind of talked about the way in which it was presented. So Thomas and Friends started airing in England in 1984, and it was not aired with Shining Time Station on PBS until 1989. So by that point, 1984 to 1989, Thomas was a hit in England, and so they wanted to bring it stateside in a bit of a different presentation. As of 2020, Thomas and Friends is still airing, and there is 558 episodes that have been produced for the show, whether live action or CGI.
It's catching up to One Piece.
Yeah, really. You know what? It is, in a way, almost baby's first One Piece.
There you go. That's the episode description.
There's as many friggin' characters as there are in Thomas as there are Straw Hats. So, I'm surprised I wasn't like predisposed to One Piece. I'm not really as much into One Piece, but I know a little bit here and there. But yeah, really, from an early age, I think it would have been funny if I had seen One Piece first. This would probably be another One Piece podcast for all I know. So, Shining Time Station is the PBS show we're talking about today, as I've mentioned before. And Shining Time was created by Britt Allcroft and producer Rick Sigelkow, and it was produced originally out of New York for PBS. And then it had 3 seasons. The production actually moved to Toronto after the first season. So, I was confused initially. The reason that I thought that we would just have to do Thomas and Friends is because I wasn't aware that Shining Time Station aired on PBS. And it did. It aired on PBS, Fox Family, and Nick Jr. in America. Over here in Canada, it was one of the rare ones to air on both PBS and YTV.
Whoa.
So YTV youth television is pretty, I would say, would that be...
I mean, it makes sense. YTV is, of course, based in Toronto, right?
Yes.
For context for our American listeners, there was basically 2 big youth TV stations here in Canada, YTV and Teletoon. Teletoon, of course, was located in Quebec and Montreal. Teletoon, that makes sense. And then YTV was in the Toronto area.
Yeah, and still is. Now, I think the closest comparisons would be to, of course, Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. Which ones would you say, off the top of my head, would it be Cartoon Network, Teletoon, Nickelodeon, YTV?
I think it's kind of difficult because it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison. And also there was other shows. So in Canada, there was really 4 children's networks, and I don't want to get too far into this because I could talk about this all day. But we had Treehouse, Family Channel, YTV, and Teletoon. Yeah. And in reality, Family Channel was kind of the Nickelodeon. That's where all the Disney shows would play, Zoe 101, Hannah Montana, that kind of stuff. And then YTV, I would say, had more of the Cartoon Network fare. But, Nickelodeon shows like SpongeBob, for instance, would be on YTV. But then Cartoon Network shows like Powerpuff Girls would be on YTV. The reason that maybe you were associating Teletoon with Cartoon Network is that Teletoon, once it became nighttime, that's where Teletoon really shined, because they had The Detour, which was essentially Teletoon's version of Adult Swim. But also similarly, YTV would show anime after a certain hour at night. So they both kind of had, and I believe that was called the Vortex, or I forget what I think it
had different names. It was like Shift at one point. It was Vortex.
It's kind of an apples to oranges, where Teletoon and Teletoon is a little bit more French, and Teletoon definitely had more of the, like, you would see a lot of like Looney Tunes and stuff like that on Teletoon. It's I would say Teletoon and YTV together are kind of the Cartoon Network, and then like Family Channel would be the Nickelodeon.
I always thought the Family Channel was like the Disney Channel.
It's like a combination of the two. It's really hard. The Canadian ones are all weird.
I guess the point is that
it's so funny.
It's hard to pin down. Yeah.
Yeah, and for our American listeners, they all have very distinct vibes as well, right? So YTV's whole thing was like, it's gross. There's like these creatures and eyeballs and stuff like that. And then Teletoon was kind of, the iconography of Teletoon reminds me a lot more of Nickelodeon, with like the orange and like the smiley face logo, and just kind of like, whereas YTV had like more of an edge to it. But yeah, we're way off topic. We got to get back. We got a lot of train talk ahead of us. So we got to get back on the track, so to speak.
Shining Time Station, YTV was where Lucas and I would have watched it, or potentially on APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, which was always channel 70, I believe it was in the basic cable package.
And there is an Indigenous character in the show.
Yeah,
so that makes
we'll get into that in a little bit. Shining Time Station, 3 seasons, 70 episodes that aired from 1989 to 1993, and of course repeats after that, because I would have been a little bit, I believe I was watching it in the era of like 1995 to 1997, so they would have had reruns, and also had additional specials that aired in 1995, Christmas and holiday and whatnot. And the Thomas and the Magic Railroad movie has a link to Shining Time Station. It shares a couple of the characters.
Whoa, this is crazy. I had no idea.
Yeah. And it was a very popular show. It usually averaged over 1 million viewers per episode, and at its peak, it brought in over 7 million. Again, Thomas was becoming this allowed Thomas to become as big a hit as it was worldwide. I didn't even create a merchandise section for this episode, because it's like, come on, like, you've probably, if you've ever been to one of those toy stores, they have a display of the wooden Thomas figures, and you'd beg your mother to buy you something, and it was just a no-go, which I agree. These are basically, the model kits of 3-year-olds. Once you start buying them, then it's a complete money sink. And I never knew anybody who owned them. So my mother was right not to let me do that. Let's talk a little bit about the cast. And you mentioned, of course, in the episode we watched here, the biggest star is George Carlin as Mr. Conductor. This was the first time I'd ever seen him before. Lucas, are you aware of who was Mr. Conductor directly before and after George Carlin?
I only know because in Thomas the Tank Engine is Ringo Starr, isn't that right?
That's right. So he was the first Mr. Conductor, and he was that role for the first season of Shining Time Station.
I see.
And then directly following that, as was in Thomas and the Magic Railroad, was Alec Baldwin.
Oh my goodness.
And then there have been other, voices that have filled in as well. I wonder if you would have recognized the person who is playing Stacy Jones. Her name is Dee Dee Khan, and she has a recognizable role. Do you know what it is?
It's in Grease, correct?
That's right. She's Frenchie in Grease.
Yeah, I recognized her immediately, and I sprinted to the IMDb to figure out what she was from. She reminds me, it's one of those actresses that has a kind of, oh my goodness, it's escaping me. What's the woman from The Shining's name again?
Shelley Duvall.
Yeah, she's got like that you don't see this type of actress anymore, but she's got that kind of Shelley Duvall kind of look and manner of speaking, and there used to be like a ton of actresses that would do that back in the 80s.
It was really in vogue at the time. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. And we have some other actors who you wouldn't necessarily know them from roles, but I just wanted to make sure to mention them, such as Schemer, who is played by Brian O'Connor. We have Dan...
And by the way, and we're going to get into this later on in the episode, but props to Brian O'Connor putting in a magnificent performance as Schemer. My goodness.
A little bit of a tip to what we'll talk about later. There's Dan and Becky, who are played by Ari Magder and Danielle Marcotte, respectively. There is the character of Kara, who we also see in this episode, played by Erica Luttrell, who you will recognize her voice as Keisha from the Magic School Bus. Okay.
I remember Keisha,
She's
yes.
a prominent voice actor, still is. One of her most recent credits is playing Emily in Dishonored 2. So that's where I would also recognize her from. Billy Two Feathers, played by an indigenous Canadian actor named Tom Jackson, who is also, he's a well-known singer and an officer of the Order of Canada. So he's very well regarded here in our country. And also wanted to make mention, you can't really hear his voice in the episode we're talking about here, but one of the puppets, the puppet named Tito Swing, is voiced by Jonathan Freeman, who also does the voice of Jafar in every single Aladdin thing ever made. So I just wanted to mention that. The episode we decided to watch today, or rather I decided to watch, and it was all based around the... it was all based around the Thomas episodes. I wanted to make sure to pick the quote-unquote right ones. So I picked the Shining Time Station episode called Yabba Yabba Yabba. It is Season 2, Episode 12, which aired on December 17th, 1991. And it's time to talk about the theme song. And Lucas, I really need you to do me a favor here. I need you to be, not for me, for our listeners, I need you to be as brutally honest as possible about your feelings here.
So Will, I don't want to color my feelings too much based on that statement there, but this might come as to your surprise, Will. I actually really liked the theme song.
Okay, I was actually expecting you to not even dislike it. I was just expecting it to do nothing for you at all.
No, see, Will, I love folk music. I'm a big fan of folk music. I love the likes of, Phil Oakes. I love old Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, all that stuff. So a good folk song goes a long way with me. And this is what I wrote down in my notes. This was my honest impression. I was like, I like the Shining Time Station theme song. It's a good folk song.
And of course...
And train tracks, railroads, town to town. This is well-worn territory for the genre.
And I made sure to have you listen to the end credits as well, because that is kind of the fuller version of the theme song. The one that starts off the show is like 30 seconds long, and I was like, oh, that's not enough. You need to get a bigger impression. And there's the one over the end credits is kind of the more full version of the song. The theme song was composed by Joe Raposo, who also composed the theme song for Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and Three's Company, among many others.
Oh,
so, a legend in the game.
Dude, I was just going to say, what a legend. Three's Company and Electric Company are both just like absolute bangers.
And the song was sung by Kevin Roth, who is, as I discovered, one of the premier dulcimer players in the world. So,
oh my goodness, I'm learning so much today.
I know, really. Okay, so I had to ask you for your unbiased opinion as someone who probably had heard it before, but I'm telling you, like, as soon as I found the episode and I pressed play on my YouTube, and then it immediately came flooding back to me, the sense memory of having YTV on in the background on a weekday afternoon after school. Shining Time Station comes on, and I run to in front of the TV and just sit my ass down, cross-legged. It just came flooding back to me, so it's impossible for me to be biased about this. I love this theme song, but it's because it's basically a portal back to childhood for me. So I'm glad to know that it is, like, actually kind of good, so to speak. There is a lot of live action in this show, although not as much as I thought that I remembered. It starts off with Stacey Jones who is kind of the primary worker at Shining Time Station, and she is having a conversation with a friend about her new boyfriend, and while Mr. Conductor is writing in his diary. So was it odd to see George Carlin in this kind of in this kind of role for you?
No, I think I've because of Bill and Ted, I knew George Carlin had range, right? Like, it's not like Bill and Ted's particularly X-rated compared to Carlin's comedy. And I think George Carlin's one of those celebrities where in his time you could see him pop up a whole manner of places. He was kind of everywhere. So I didn't think this was odd at all. And in fact, as I continued watching the episode, I was kind of taken aback by just how good George Carlin is at this, both in his role as the tiny conductor and, in his voice work. Oftentimes, when celebrities do a role in a children's show, like, for instance, like, oh gosh, what's that awful late night guy with the British accent's name?
The one there's too many of them.
James Corden? Is it James Corden?
Okay.
Yes, so James Corden is he's in Trolls, he's in all kinds of kid stuff, right? And he's just kind of James Corden the whole time. Yeah. George Carlin, I think, totally switches up his whole vibe and kind of disappears into the character of the little conductor man. The way he carries himself, the way he talks to the kids is like a character unto itself. And then in regards to narrating the episodes, he does an incredible job. Like, I would have never have thought, just being familiar with his comedy, that he had kind of the perfect voice and such good storytelling capability. But I think he's really an immaculate fit.
Well, it's funny you talk about the voice because that is how I primarily knew him. Even more than Mr. Conductor, he was the narrator on so many of my Thomas videos. And then by the time I was old enough to, see some of his stand-up work, and it's to me it was, why is Mr. Conductor saying the 7 words you can't say on television? So I had to really reconcile that for a little while. Because that's who he was. That's who he was for me for a long part of my life. So as Stacy is talking on the phone, we get the character Schemy, a.k.a. Ace Ventura Jr. over here with the...
legend. Schemy, instant legend. So first of all, Schemy is... what can I say about this king? So Schemy is wearing this incredible... But first of all, this fit is supposed to be gaudy, I believe, for the time. Yes. He's got this crazy, ascot and, this really loud blazer and these sort of bell-bottom chinos, these brown bell-bottom pants. But now he just kind of looks like how Harry Styles dresses. Schemy is actually fashion forward.
God.
He looks incredible. And then not only does he, and also, of course, how can we forget the hair? So he's got his hair in a perfectly gelled calic, as well as a long kind of mullet in the back. And so immediately Schemy's just a character, and then this kid is just putting on I don't even have the words for the performance this kid puts on. Because it's he's overacting. It's definitely bad kid acting. Yeah. This is not Haley Joel Osment or something. But he's incredible. I'm watching him on silent right now, and it's one of those things where he's loud on silent. This kid is a living cartoon, and he's doing such a good job just being for lack of a better term, he's just kind of being a prick. He's the whole thing about Schemy is just he's just the worst kid in the world, always critical of his friends. Nobody wants to be around him. I loved him. I love Schemy. I'm a big scheme head.
I should have known that those two would capture your imagination. I don't know why I didn't think of that, but it totally stands to reason. And I'm so glad. The only description I had is that he acts like a dick. But you even covered that, so I think you are our resident scheme head on this episode. So I'll kind of lay back for those. To let you talk, and of course the other kids are not nearly as interesting as Schemy. But again, I found myself very much transported back to watching this as a kid and being oh well, and Schemy's the bad kid, and me, I was a complete narc as a kid, and just but I like the good kids better, even though they're not interesting. So it worked very well on me. The kind of the character alignments that I was supposed to agree with. I was a very suggestible young child.
You know what they say, Will? Every kid, every friend group's got a Schemy, and if yours doesn't, you're the Schemy. So it's starting to sound like, Will, that I was the Schemy of my friend group. But no, so Skeeby's eavesdropping on Dee Dee Cobb's character, and she's like talking to one of her girlfriends about some goss, like they're gossing it up about some like drama. And like Skeeby's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm just talking to my friend about her, like, what was it, her new boyfriend or something?"
Yeah.
And then Skeeby goes, "I can figure out the rest." And I wrote, "What does that mean?"
What does he know? Oh, he probably would know more than he should at that point. Oh, he'd be one of those types of kids who just found out a little too much and is lording it over everybody. And yeah, like you said, he acts like a prick to the other kids for no real reason, and nobody really likes him. But that is his character type. This leads into one of the 2 segments in every Shining Time Station episode with a Thomas feature, and then they're about 5 minutes long, which is how long the stories were generally. So the first one, I can tell they don't tell you the title in the episode. I can tell you the title is "Pop Goes the Diesel," and I wanted to do this one because I thought it was like I guess this is funny in a way. I wanted to do this episode because I thought it was like the Diesel saga, which we see part 1, but Lucas, I have to tell you, there's a part 2 and a part 3 to this part 1 we're about to talk about that we don't get to see in this episode.
It's like the Berserk Golden Age arc or something. That's crazy. I can't wait to see what happens with Diesel. Like, what is Diesel's next form?
That is incredibly generous of you.
But no, so Diesel, much like Skeemy, is also kind of a prick.
Yeah.
He's what I'm assuming is a diesel train who has come into town. And he wants to, it's his way or the highway, Will.
Yeah.
He thinks he's better than all the other trains just because he's a diesel train.
But I will say this, the episode starts off with one of the kind of, not a major character, but, would be featured quite a bit, is Duck, the Great Western Engine. And Duck's no peach either. Like, I really, as a kid, you're meant to kind of, Duck's the good guy and Diesel's the bad guy. And obviously Diesel's the bad guy because... the way he looks, and the kind of, like, they always say he has an oily voice and stuff like that. I also noticed that they do a bunch of leitmotifs in the show. Like, they have one for Duck at the very beginning. It's very, like, regal and proper because he's a Great Western Engine. And then Diesel has one that's very, like, slinky and, it's kind of smoky. So I really liked that, and they also all have a distinct whistle, which also helps to distinguish them beyond their color and their faces. As we said before, I love how this looks. Like, I still do. Like, the models, the sets, the trains themselves, the way they move, the way they sound, it's unbeatable. I could watch this for hours, and I'm so glad that you are also able to kind of see similar to what I see in it. Maybe not with the same intensity, but yeah.
Oh no, but you know me, Will. I'm the model guy. I'm the puppet guy. Like I Gremlins 2, depending on the day you ask me, is my favorite movie. So I can appreciate a good model, a good miniature. So I agree. I think all this stuff looks great. So yeah, Diesel is like, he's pushing these. I felt so bad for the cars. So there's the trains, which are the front, and then there's the cars that they got to get moved around. And this is, and I've seen clips of Thomas the Tank Engine as an adult out of context that makes the whole thing seem horrific, right? There's that infamous one where I think is it Percy who gets like stuck in the wall?
Henry.
That's like, look that up, dear listeners, if you want to get disturbed. That's some like Edgar Allan Poe style horrible justice that befalls Henry. But similarly, we have there's this hierarchy where the trains push everybody around, but boy howdy would I not want to be one of these poor cars who are basically like getting human centipeded all the time and like getting their face smashed into each other's butts. And so no wonder the cars... they don't really like Diesel's style of doing things, so they put up a fight against him whenever he's trying to push them around.
Yeah, the idea of autonomy in the Thomas the Tank Engine universe is really hard.
Sentience.
Sentience, I mean, they clearly are, because they have thoughts and feelings, but how much they're in control of themselves is really not clear at all times, because sometimes they are entirely controlled by their drivers and conductors. Other times they can kind of go by themselves, or like kind of influence how they're controlled. Like you said, the cars are the cars can't drive themselves. They have to be moved, but they can also like choose not to move. So
when you put it that way, Will, doesn't that just sound like you and me? Doesn't that just sound like all of us? We think we're in control, and we think but sometimes can't you just not move? Don't you know how that is?
Yes.
Sometimes you got to go to work. That's your conductor.
So,
I don't know, something to think about, something to mull over.
I will also say that the freight cars in the show are generally, they're like the Tibble twins of Thomas the Tank Engine. They're like little troublemakers, and nobody really likes them.
Yeah, they always have these messed up faces. So but I still felt bad for them because it just seems like they have a miserable existence.
Fair enough, and I think that's with the benefit of hindsight, you're able to see that. So I don't disagree. Like I was saying before, yeah, Diesel's obviously no good, and he's made out to be the villain. But Duck comes across as an asshole. Because he's just like he's even like there's two ways to do things: the Great Western way or the wrong way. I'm Great Western, and don't we know it? So nobody really likes him all that much. So and him.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of like Thomas himself in this episode, who I assume is just supposed to be kind of the arbiter of he's like the good guy, right?
He is.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
He can be cheeky at times, maybe a little naughty or trying things above his station. But
would you say that Thomas the Tank Engine is a puckish rogue, if you will?
I don't know if I go that far, but he's like a little kid. He kind of gets into scrapes and has to pay the consequences sometimes. So I just the whole thing here is that Diesel runs afoul of Duck, and Duck plays a trick on him. But it's okay because Diesel's the bad guy. But it's still just like, I don't know, Duck was kind of mean to him for like no good reason other than he didn't like his vibes. He didn't pass Duck's vibe check. So then he just kind
failed the vibe check.
No. And I mean, for good reason. Also just want to note here, this was one of the many where I knew this short from a tape where Ringo Starr was narrating it. So, in my opinion, I don't think that George Carlin does a particularly good job with the narration for this one. I think Ringo Starr did it a lot better. He has a whole different voice for Diesel, and I think it works a lot better. I would recommend, if you're watching this episode along with us, to seek that out. All of the Thomas and Friends episodes are on YouTube. You can just find them on their own. There was so the trick that Duck plays on Diesel, it involves, like you said, the cars kind of refusing to go because they're old and don't want to be moved. Speaking of George Carlin's narration, there's some pretty suggestive groaning when Diesel's trying to move them.
I also noticed this weird groaning.
It's I won't repeat it because but it's I was thinking about something else. And that's where, like I said, this is kind of a part 1 of 3. So this is kind of where the story ends. And Lucas, if you're at all interested, I can give you the names of the other 2 episodes you can watch with this to get the full story.
Perhaps I think I have to now. Noting that there's this huge arc with Diesel.
It was kind of like, it is, again, Baby's first story arc in that, everything doesn't wrap up at the end of this episode.
So next we check back in with, and I was really delighted, and I will say, Will, that as an adult, my favorite part of this whole thing isn't actually the Thomas sections at all, but all the extra Shining Time Station stuff. It really endeared itself to me, and I started to really become engaged with it. Right off the bat, I love Skeeby, but then we get this sequence with Billy Two Feathers,
yes,
which I thought was just delightful, and he's teaching them kind of the history behind the drum and how people used to use the drum to communicate, and I thought this was just great.
Yeah, this was cool, and I was so interested to learn more about, I didn't have a good sense of who Billy Two Feathers was. He's really cool. He's just very, very much the Mr. Fix-It of the station, and they even get him he narrates this segment about railroad history, and I didn't remember this at all.
I was going to say, real train footage!
Yeah, and how he was talking about how trains used to communicate with signal lights and whistles. I found this, actually fascinating. And then he was briefly talking about how the indigenous people of his tribe, I don't think he specifically says which one, use drums in different ways to communicate different messages. And he was talking about, we'll hit on this part of the drum to mean this. And I was like, this is super cool. I really appreciate that this is in here, because it's rare that you would have a show for an American audience, a North American audience, that specifically puts in indigenous content that is meant to educate. And I think that's really important.
That's more present in Canadian shows, I find. Just in my personal experience, especially in Canadians' TV shows, there's more of an indigenous connection. It's just it's something that gets included more often than in American stuff. So this was really great to see. And of course, man of the hour, Schemy, sorry, not to get him confused with Schemer. We'll get into Schemer in a second. But Schemy shows up, and he's, oh my goodness, this is where I was like, this kid is a genius. When he's like watching them bang on the drum, and he's just like shaking his head from side to side. I don't even know which emotion he's trying to convey. Like, he's like, he gets these big eyes when he sees everybody hanging out without him, and he's like, and then like he's like shaking his head from side to side, just like in displeasure, I assume. But yeah, Schemy continues to be great, and he will never pass up an opportunity to ruin everyone's fun. They go to play, can and string, and Schemy's shown off his new walkie-talkies. So already we're teaching kids, that's fun because they made the cans themselves. And Schemy's like, yeah, but I just copped these. And they want to play with my walkie-talkies.
And in fairness to him, they are cooler. So
they are cooler, I will say. But it's like, at least these kids are, these kids have their integrity intact. They're not just going to hop to hang out with Schemy because he's got cool walkie-talkies. They're like, this guy sucks. But then... Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You can go ahead.
Well, now we're getting introduced to Schemer, Schemy's uncle.
Yes, because there's what ends up being the message of this episode is, you need to make sure to respect people's privacy in terms of like private conversations and stuff like that. So one of the girls gets a letter from her pen pal. And she's really excited to read it, and Schemy just kind of takes it out of her hands and wants to read it first, even though it is private. And this is where Stacey Jones and Schemer come into the picture. Just want to note quick here, a quick line read from Schemy. Like you said, he does pretty well in the role that he has, but he's also not, he's a child actor. He can only be so good. So they're talking about like him reading the letter, and Schemy just goes, "I wasn't going to tell anybody what it said." Just this very pregnant pause between what is supposed to be one sentence. So yeah, Schemy's uncle, who owns the arcade in Shining Time Station. What did you make of him?
I love Schemer. Okay, so Schemer is literally, and I love that we were introduced to Schemy before we were introduced to Schemer because it made the payoff all the more better. Schemer is dressed exactly like Schemy. So it's like this kid has decided to pattern himself off his like crazy eccentric uncle. And yeah, Schemer is dressed like he's out of like Buckaroo Banzai or something. The guy looks incredible. And then he similarly has a mullet and a giant greasy calic. And I also am not quite sure if the show, like, because, oh my goodness, I'm watching him like bang on the jukebox. It's so great. But I'm not sure if the show wants us to like Schemer or not, or if he's just supposed to be an extension of Schemy, because he's like also kind of a dick. Maybe not quite as overtly a dick as Schemy, but I don't know. I love Schemer.
To your point, I think he is meant to be more of the puckish rogue of the cast. He's not so much a direct antagonist, but he is a bit of a trickster, and he'll stir up trouble. So, but there, I do have a vague memory of times where he would like help out the good guys and stuff like that. But he was just kind of like,
for instance, he's the one at the end of this episode that kind of lays down the law and gives Schemy his comeuppance.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting that you were so attached to Schemer because I mentioned before when we were talking about the cast, his actor Brian O'Connor. This is like maybe the biggest role that Brian O'Connor ever had, to the point where they had like several Shining Time specials that were just about Schemer, and he even did like appearances in public as Schemer. So people love this character. I mean, it makes
sense. Like, yeah, I think it makes sense. Schemer's a force of nature. I would watch a Schemer exclusive show. The kid's incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could probably still do that. There is like a Schemer either show or special that they did when I was kind of looking through his IMDb. So yeah, one of the things about Schemer is that, like we said, he owns the arcade, and in the arcade is a jukebox, and every episode they do a song in where somebody puts a coin in the jukebox, and that's the cue for the Flexitoon puppets in the jukebox to do a song.
So earlier, I was talking about, I like the Shining Time Station intro. It's a good folk song, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
They sing this country song, Get Out the Way, Old Man Tucker. And Will, it's heat. This is heat. This is absolute fire. It knocks, it bangs, it slaps. This is good shit, my dude. This is a fantastic song. I love these puppets. They can shred. They're shredded on the fiddle, rather. I can't even talk. I'm so excited about these GD puppets and their country song. This was awesome.
I'm glad you liked it, and I had a feeling you probably would. I did too, and I think that is the idea behind the show is that obviously they're using things that are in the public domain. This is like Old Dan Tucker is like an American standard. So again, going back to your thing about folk music, and the way they do it is really good. Now the puppets themselves are not like, this isn't like Muppet quality. The puppeteers that they had on the show have experience with the Muppets and stuff like that. So, they're legit. But the puppets themselves are not of, amazing quality. They look okay. They're a little basic. Like the one named Tito, he almost kind of looks like he moves like a hand puppet. So like not a whole lot of articulation, but it's charming enough. Like they all have their own little personalities. There's like the two twins who are like country and western. There's the drummer. There's Tito who plays the piano. There's the one who plays the stand-up bass. And yeah, I said in my notes, Old Dan Tucker, kind of a jam. I actually really enjoyed this part.
It was also at this point in the show where I was starting to realize one of Shining Time Station's kind of good qualities is the variety on the show.
Yes.
Already we've had a Thomas segment, 2 of the Shining Time Station segments, and now this puppet segment. And it reminded me of another show we watched, albeit much more slowly paced than this show, but it kind of reminded me of Between the Lions. In that Between the Lions, I was constantly engaged because it just kept throwing stuff at us. Mm-hmm. It kept switching up, whether it was animated or live action, it kept switching up the format. There was all this crazy stuff. And similarly, Shining Time Station probably has more in common with pacing with like Mr. Rogers or something. But unlike Mr. Rogers, where I did kind of get a little bit bored, Will, I was engaged throughout this because it kind of kept switching it up. That and Schemey, of course.
Yeah, and I agree. It's funny because I think even when I was a kid, I was like, I am there for Thomas, and that is it. But obviously, if Shining Time Station wasn't able to hook me the whole show, I could just watch my Thomas videos. So there was clearly something to the show that made me, as a kid, keep coming back. And I think we're seeing it right here. At this point, Schemey is bugging Shining Time Station with the 2 walkie-talkies that he has in order to listen in on private conversations.
Yeah, he's like Nixon or something.
Little Nixon. And there is a point where the kids kind of catch on what he's up to. I feel like I've said this a lot because the kids themselves are basically, you can project yourself into them. Not Schemey, but like the main ones. And I'm sure I was as indignant as they were, of just like, Schemey's doing something bad. They know what's up, but the other adults don't know what's going on. And I'm pretty sure at one point Becky says walkie-talkie, like pronounces the L's in it. So I don't know.
That's like how I talk sometimes.
And Mr. Conductor takes us into the second Thomas episode, which is Diesel Does It Again. This is not directly related to the first Diesel thing. It's like he has a bit of a later... In fact, I found it odd because there is a point in this second Diesel episode where Duck is even like, hey, I thought you were sent packing. And Sir Topham Hatt is like, I had to bring him back. And that's what happens at the very end of the Diesel saga that I mentioned before. So a little bit out of sync here.
I liked this Diesel episode even more. It's got everything. First of all, I thought those cars friggin' died when Diesel got them in the water. I was like, oh my god, those cars are dead. Already they were having a tough go of it, bumping around each other's butts all the time. Now it's like we're watching, because I was like, they're gonna drown. Like, these cars can't swim. They're train cars.
Well, again, that kind of goes back to the point of like, can they breathe? And like, data inconclusive.
Well, so George Carlin is sure to let us know in the voiceover, the clay was ruined, but the cars were saved. And then, of course, I also liked this other part, which is that the other trains unionize, and they go on strike until Diesel is removed.
Well, and so to your point about the cars, first of all, there are just some that don't have faces, so they're not alive. So figure that out. But yes, you're right. I thought this was really interesting. Percy and Duck refuse to work with Diesel because they know that he's bad news. They even say, we're on strike. So this was really interesting.
Solidarity with Percy and Duck. That's all I have to say.
Big time. And, you know, they are predisposed to dislike him because of his reputation before. And Sir Topham Hatt, who is otherwise known as the Fat Controller, who is like a little, the human characters are like little models that don't move. So he has gotten Diesel to come down to work with Percy and Duck at the docks because they have a lot of work to do and they're very overworked. So they need another set of wheels, and Diesel is the only one he could get. But it turns out Diesel is a super incompetent employee and also an asshole. So we have like several instances, like you said. He's too rough with the cars. He accidentally sends them into the drink. He accidentally bumps Percy when they wake up in the morning and doesn't apologize. But he also uses a similar line to what Schemy does in Shining Time Station, which is, you know, the kids know that Schemy is using the walkie-talkies for something. He's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to tattle? Are you going to be a tattletale? And Diesel does the same thing. He's just like, it's like, what? He essentially says, are you going to be a tattletale to Sir Topham Hatt? And that kind of shuts him up. And it is very schoolyard, but obviously that is for the audience they are doing it for. This is definitely a workplace issue. You have to bring this up with HR immediately. And this is almost a classic, like, I would be surprised, Lucas, if you didn't have this. I certainly have. The classic workplace situation of preferring to do more work instead of working with a shithead, which is where we are at the end of the episode, is that, like, Sir Topham Hatt is like, do you guys, it's like, I'm going to get Diesel out of here. Do you guys mind doing more work? And they're just like, yeah, sure. No problem. He sucks. So I'm sure both of us have been in the situation where it's like, you know what? If you just got them out of here, I would prefer to do their work for them. So you're right. I actually enjoyed this from a whole angle that I didn't expect to. The whole workers' rights angle was pretty good. You can also see more clearly in this episode that Diesel sucks and, like, you are right to dislike him. This isn't like Duck being proud or anything. It's just like, no, he's just not a good guy. When we go back to Shining Time Station, this is where we get the message of the episode. Mr. Conductor lays it out to the kids. So basically, if someone is doing something dangerous, you should tell an adult.
That's right. Though he is quick to say, you know, no one likes a tattletale.
Right.
He does preface that with, no one likes a tattletale, which I thought was more nuanced than I expected for a show looking for, you know, presented to this young of an audience. But then we get what is probably my favorite sequence of the whole episode. And this is what I was talking earlier about, kind of the variety present in this show. Because we get this sequence of Schemy tearing apart Shining Time Station looking for toys. And the whole thing is, like, sped up of him, like, ripping Shining Time Station apart like he's, like, Citizen Kane. And I was just delighted with this whole sequence. As a Schemy fan, I was cackling at him, like, ripping apart Shining Time Station. And, like, just, like, again, the physical performance of Schemy's actor is, like, really unique. I really encourage you to see it yourself, because the kid is a walking cartoon. But then to see him, like, sped up and just, like, making a mess of this station, I was delighted this whole time. He's even messing with the jukebox that's got the puppets in it. This is great.
And of course, the reason...
It's almost experimental, the way it's moving so fast.
The reason being is because the kids play a very, very see-throughable trick on him that they say into the walkie-talkie that there are toys hidden somewhere in Shining Time Station, and which is what causes Schemy to tear the place apart. But interestingly, so what I thought was going to happen here was that Schemy would make a mess, then, like, Stacy and Billy would come back in and be like, who made this mess? And then Schemy would get in trouble. But what happens is, Schemy makes the mess, then he turns back around, and it's completely cleaned up, which I'm guessing is a Mr. Conductor thing. And
yes, we see Mr. Conductor do it. So Mr. Conductor...
okay, I missed that.
And I feel like we didn't talk about this enough, that Mr. Conductor is a tiny person.
Right, yes.
So first of all, Mr. Conductor is like a tiny like nymph or something. I don't know much about him or his powers. He's like Q from Star Trek.
Right.
Like, he could appear and disappear at will. Nobody knows kind of the limits to his power. But he's friends with these kids. And so to teach Skeeby his lesson, he magically kind of makes everything get cleaned up after Skeeby messes up the whole station. Which causes Skeeby to lose his mind and think that ghosts are real.
And that goes into a conversation that he had with his uncle Schemer before, where it's like Schemer believes that Shining Time Station is haunted, and that is actually a through line of the show because the kids and Stacy know that Mr. Conductor exists, but Schemer does not. So he attributes this to ghosts. And so this is where Skeemy is like, whoa, it is haunted. And Schemer comes back in and he's like, well, why do you think there's ghosts now? And he's like, well, because I was looking around for, I thought were toys and I threw everything everywhere. So Schemer, like you said, decides to lay down the law a little bit. I thought this was genuinely funny. His punishment for Skeemy is to use a comb to flatten his curl.
Oh, yeah. He not only says that he was looking for toys, he was saying he heard people talking about toys on the intercom. So Schemer figures out that Skeemy was bugging everything. But yes, and this was, I thought, and what a great cherry on top of this whole episode, which I had quite a bit of fun watching. But this great climax where Schemer is painstakingly flattening the calic on Skeemy with like a comb he's got on hand, and while Skeemy kind of protests the whole time, going like, "No, please, like don't flatten my curl,
not the curl, not the curl." I got a genuine laugh out of that. I thought that was funny, and there is a like last like end of the episode sort of thing where Mr. Conductor like kind of whispers Schemer's name and again keeps the thing going. Like Schemer thinks that the place is haunted, and I wonder. I can't confirm whether or not he ever found out about Mr. Conductor, but that's kind of the through line to keep you guessing. And it felt like one of those like a Dora the Explorer moments. Like I'm certain that as a kid, I was like, he's right behind you, look behind you, kind of thing. You know, and it's like, where's Swiper? He's over there. You know, just playing along with the audience. So I feel that spoke to me. So I'm sure that happened at some point. And that's where the episode ends. Lucas, I'm really interested to see where you ended up with all of this. This is not so much your thing as it is my thing, but but as I was the one to take you down this train track, where did we end up?
I really enjoyed Shining Time Station. Now, I will say that it wasn't actually so much for the Thomas stuff. And I knew what I was getting into with the Thomas stuff. I've seen quite a bit of Thomas the Tank Engine when I was younger. Like I said, I liked the movie a lot when I was little. And of course, so I knew what I was getting into with that stuff, but all the Shining Time Station stuff was totally new to me, and I actually found it more engaging than the Thomas bits. I loved all the characters. I loved George Carlin. I thought that the kid playing Skeeby was great. I thought the guy playing Schemer was great. I thought that Tom Jackson did a really good job as what's
Billy?
his name? Oh, Billy Two Feathers. I really liked Dee Dee Khan. I thought she was, in the brief times we saw her, she was really good. So all these elements together with the puppets and I thought I was really, really entertained by the Shining Time Station segments, and it's not something I'd ever been exposed to before. So I would count this, you know, we always ask the same question at the end of these For the Kids episodes, which is, do you think this show holds up for you personally, as well as would it hold up for kids now? And I definitely think the answer to this one's yes, because usually, especially these older shows, these older live action shows, these are probably the shows that are the most dated when we return to them. For instance, when we were talking about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and stuff like that. But going back to Shining Time Station, I think, you know, the Thomas stuff still works. That stuff's completely timeless. You could show a kid that at any point. But for me, I really enjoyed kind of the George Carlin bits. What about you, Will? I want to hear you as kind of the resident head, as we were saying. What was your impression returning to this old childhood favorite?
Well, of course, the Thomas stuff are things that I still watch to this day whenever the mood strikes me, so that's never going to not be great to me for the reasons that we talked about. Shining Time Station itself, it was such a nostalgia bomb that's in many different ways that it's hard for me to be objective about it, but I am pleased to basically, Lucas, you're like the control group of like, okay, so I'm not crazy to think that this is like actually pretty good for a kids show. I think that also goes hand in hand with, we have given very positive reviews to, yeah, you mentioned with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, it doesn't work all the time, but we appreciate the kids shows that have variety and that are able to use different mediums of expression to entertain kids and even to educate them at times without it being overbearing.
That's right. The variety in it reminded me of a show that I was thinking about, because I had a friend actually ask me about kind of which shows have we watched on For the Kids that I enjoyed the most. And I still think probably the gold standard is Between the Lions. Like, I had an absolute blast when we watched Between the Lions. That show's like insane. And of course, Shining Time Station is certainly slower paced and a little bit more calmed down than the bombast that is Between the Lions, but it has enough going on that I think it's got enough variety to be totally entertaining even today.
Yeah, I wouldn't have any problems showing this to a kid today. I think that there's enough that kind of keeps it going, and that keeps it timeless. You mentioned the word timeless a couple of times, and of course, Thomas definitely is, but I think Shining Time in its own way is as well, because we still have railroads. It's not, the trains haven't gone out of fashion as such just yet. Their role is different now a little, but you still know what a train is. And I think that the characters themselves are so well played that it's easy to kind of get into them. And I was actually really pleased that Schemer and Schemy hit such a note with you. I think that that's such a fun development. So yeah, I was very pleased to see that I was right all along, that I backed the right horse with Shining Time Station, but I think it was good that we were able to take the time to affirm the good parts of Shining Time Station itself, because I don't think Thomas and Friends needs any more affirmation than it does. It was just very nice to subject another friend to Thomas and Friends, and hopefully I'll be able to do that more in the future, one way or the other. Lucas, this is our last full episode of For the Kids for this year, 2020, and it has been a fun little side thing that we've been doing here. To take one of your expressions, ECL Gaiden is what you might be able to think of this as. But we've had a lot of fun kind of looking at the origins of some of the kids shows we grew up with, or didn't grow up with in some cases, and take a look at how children's programming has evolved throughout the years. Which means that, since it was my pick this time, it is your pick for next time. The first For the Kids episode of 2021 coming in January. What are we going to be looking at?
So, Will, they often say that it's a new year. You got to set the tone. 2020 was a lot. And I thought, why don't we ensure that next year gets started off on the right foot?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, we've been having these polls, Will.
Yeah.
Fans of the show will remember we've had these polls to pick the show sometimes. Sometimes when it's not me or your pick, we let the audience vote. And a little show has showed up in some of these polls, and I've always been secretly polling for it.
Oh, no.
And it's never quite kind of gotten ahead of the pack. So I'm taking matters into my own hands.
Oh.
I'm not gonna. I have to ensure that 2021 is off to the correct start.
It's Word Girl, right? It's Word Girl.
We're entering, Will. We're entering the Booba Zone.
Oh no!
We're going to. If you thought 2020 was weird, wait till you see what 2021 has in store, Will. Because me and you, we're hopping on to keep the train theme going. We got 2 tickets to the Booba Zone. Non-stop.
I am genuinely interested to see whose idea this was, so I know exactly who to blame when we get to that part of talking about Booba. Okay.
Let me see. I have to figure out, because the reason I keep calling it the Booba Zone is because there was a Flash website for Booba that is infamous.
Really?
And I have to figure out if that's still on the archive.net. Yes, it was called the Booba Zone. And you could click around and interact with the Boobas. We'll talk about this next episode.
I'll give you a little leeway with that, just because I know that it's going to be a little while before we get to that episode. So fair enough. Okay, so next time we are going to be stepping into the Booba Zone. Who knows?
Yay, Booba!
Yay! So who knows? Maybe it'll be better than I think it will be. I won't hold my breath.
Or
Anyway,
maybe it's just going to be a half hour of me and you talking about those weird light eyebrow freaks. We'll see.
Those disgusting creatures. If you want to hear
They
me,
kind of look like the coronavirus.
all right. So before we accidentally start doing the Booba episode now, thank you all of our patrons for a great time doing this show, and we hope you've been enjoying For the Kids, PBS Kids podcasts as much as we have. Hey, just a quick thing for some of our very, very new patrons, make sure to check your Patreon messages. I sent one out recently, and I'm looking to send a little bit of correspondence very soon, so make sure that you check your messages and get back to me ASAP, please, and thank you. All right, Lucas, I can't wait to see you again in 2021 for another episode of For the Kids, and always appreciate the from left field suggestions that you throw sometimes.
That's right. I can't wait, Will. I'll see you in the new year.
You got it, pal. All right, this is Will Young, and I'm saying that was...
PBS.